Max. Hi, Wes. Dima here. Time for another story. And I've got my friends. You remember Clifford the big red dog? He's going to kind of nap while we read today. And you remember Curious George? Wait, he wants to say something to me. No. Curious George thought this was a day he was going to Tahoe to ride bikes with you. I said, that's not what we're doing. Oh, Curious George says, is he going to Tahoe to go fishing with Max and Wes? I said, no. He's excited because now he knows today's the day we're going to read a book about him, Curious George. But before we do, let's talk about different kinds of books. This book here, What Would You Do with a Problem, is a serious book. It makes us think about how we handle things that happen in our lives. This book here, The Rainbow Fish, is about friendship, about being kind to one another. And in this case, it's about fish being kind to fish. And, well, let's get to the story of the day, Curious George. Curious George is a book about a curious monkey who seems to always get himself in trouble. So let's get started. Oh, here's a preview. And I'm going to take the book jacket off. That protects the book. I'm going to take it off while we read. This is called the title page, and it tells the author by H.A. Ray. Here we go. This is George. He lived in Africa. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. One day, George saw a man. He had on a large yellow straw hat. The man saw George too. What a nice little monkey, he thought. I would like to take him home with me. He put his hat on the ground, and of course, George was curious. He came down from the tree to look at the large yellow hat. The hat had been on the man's head. George thought it would be nice to have it on his own head. He picked it up and put it on. The hat covered George's head. He couldn't see. The man picked him up quickly and popped him into a bag. Oh, George was caught. The man with the big yellow hat put George into a little boat, and a sailor rowed them both across the water to a big ship. George was sad, but he still was a little curious. On the big ship, things began to happen. The man took off the bag. George sat on a little stool, and the man said, George, I am going to take you to a big zoo in a big city. You will like it there. Now run along and play, but don't get into trouble. George promised to be good, but it is easy for little monkeys to forget. See what happens. On the deck, he found some seagulls. He wondered how they could fly. He was very curious. Finally, he had to try. It looked easy, but... oh, what happened first? And then this. Where is George? The sailors looked and looked. At last they saw him struggling in the water, and almost all tired out. "Man overboard!" the sailors cried as they threw him a life belt. George caught it and held on. At last, he was safe on board. After that, George was more careful to be a good monkey until at last the long trip was over. George said goodbye to the kind sailors, and he and the man with the yellow hat walked off the ship onto the shore and on into the city to the man's house. After a good meal and a good pipe, George felt very tired. Monkeys don't smoke pipes. He crawled into bed and fell asleep at once. The next morning, the man telephoned the zoo. George watched him. He was fascinated. Then the man went away. George was curious. He wanted to telephone too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What fun! Let's look at that old-fashioned telephone. You had to dial it. And look, it had cords. Not like ours. Well, let's see what happens, because he made a call. Ding-a-ling-a-ling! George had telephoned the fire station. The firemen rushed to the telephone. "Hello, hello," they said. But there was no answer. Then they looked for the signal on the big map that showed where the telephone call had come from. They didn't know it was George. They thought it was a real fire. Let's see what's going to happen. Hurry, hurry, hurry! The firemen jumped onto the fire engines and onto the hook and ladders. Ding dong, ding dong! Everyone out of the way! Hurry, hurry, hurry! The firemen rushed to the house. They opened the door. No fire. Only a naughty little monkey. "Oh, catch him," they cried. George tried to run away. He almost did, but he got caught in the telephone wire and... See what happens. A thin fireman took one of his arms and a fat fireman caught the other. "You fooled the fire department," they said. "We will have to shut you up where you can't do any more harm." They took him away and shut him in a prison. I don't think monkeys really go to prisons, but this is pretend. George wanted to get out. He climbed up to the window to try the bars. Just then the watchman came in. He got on the wooden bed to catch George, but he was too big and heavy. The bed tipped up and watchman fell over, and quick as lightning, George ran out through the open door. What's gonna happen? We saw this picture before. He hurried through the building and out onto the roof, and then he was lucky to be a monkey. Out he walked onto the telephone wires, quickly and quietly over the guard's head. George walked away. He was free. Down in the street outside the prison wall stood a balloon man. A little girl bought a balloon for her brother. George watched. He was curious again. He felt he must have a bright red balloon. He reached over and tried to help himself, but instead of one balloon, the whole bunch broke loose. In an instant, the wind whisked them all away, and with them went George, holding tight with both hands. This is definitely pretend. Up, up he sailed, higher and higher. The houses looked like toy houses and the people like dolls. George was frightened. He held on very tight. At first, the wind blew in great gusts. Then it quieted. Finally, it stopped blowing altogether. George was very tired. Down, down he went, bump onto the top of a traffic light. Everyone was surprised. The traffic got all mixed up. George didn't know what to do. And then he heard someone call, "George!" He looked down and saw his friend, the man, you know, with the big yellow hat. George was happy. The man was happy too. George slid down the post and the man with the big yellow hat put him under his arm. Then he paid the balloon man for all the balloons. And then George and the man climbed into the car. And at last, away they went. Do you know where they're going? To the zoo. What a nice place for George to live. The end. George, what? George says he hopes Max and Wes really love this story about him. He likes sharing it with you. And what? Oh, yeah. Curious George reminded me. I have a new book. This one isn't about Curious George, but he loves it because it's called Waiting is Not Easy. And for Curious George, waiting is not easy at all. You can tell this book is going to be about an elephant and about waiting. So here's the question. Should Gma read you this book or should Gpa? You let us know. Well, I bet it's time to snuggle. Maybe it's nap time or maybe it's bedtime. But Curious George and I, well, let's see. We'll bring up Clifford too. We're going to say bye-bye for now. Love you lots.